Wow, here we are again today. It's Brother Peter with tidbits from the Word. I'm going to get into a little bit of a controversial subject, and the Bible answers all controversial subjects. Everything, if you want to know something, you can go back to the Bible, get you a good book. Right here I'm using Wilmington's Guide to the Bible. And this is a book that everybody should own. You should own this book. It's a very, very inexpensive book. It's really probably about a $50 book, but I think I got mine on the internet for about $20 or something. So you can search around and find it. But let's look at the great ideas from the great book. Adam was declared the king of creation, commanded to subdue the earth. Wow. One man, God made him, and he is supposed to subdue the earth, this one man. And his name was Adam. And he named all the animals to care for his beautiful home in Eden Garden. In Genesis, and you need to get your pads, pause your machine, get your pad, get your pen. And I'm not going to go to all these scriptures. I'm going to tell you that where they are, and you need to go and look at them if you're interested. If you're really interested in studying, then you must be studying Genesis 1, 28 through 31, Genesis 2, 8 through 15, and Genesis 2, 19 through 20. He was commanded to abstain from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, lest he die, Genesis 2, 17. The Hebrew language indicates here that if Adam sinned, he would die twice. This phrase can also be translated, in dying thou shalt surely die. In the Bible there are two kinds of death, and both can be defined by a single word. The word is separation. Wow. When you go to that word, you go to something. Right now, my wife and I are separated. She went to heaven last Easter, but 2 years ago, and now we are separated. But one day, Lord willing, we'll be back together if God desires to do what was on this earth in heaven. And if He doesn't, it will be vanished away, everything that happened on this earth, and we're going to be new creatures in a new place, and a new heaven and a new earth. And the two kinds of death are physical and spiritual. Wow, the physical death doesn't really matter a whole lot. It's the spiritual death that matters forever, where you're going to spend your eternity. When a person dies physically, he is separated from his body. The body is put in the ground, but the soul lives on. It can never die. The more serious kind of death, however, is spiritual death. And this will occur when the unsaved sinner will someday be forever separated from God. Wow. This is sometimes called the second death. And then I will profess unto them, I never knew you. Depart from me, ye that work iniquity. Matthew 7:23. You need to mark that down. Write that down. 7:23. You need to read that. That's serious. That's one of the most serious statement in this whole Bible. Right here is this verse right here, 7:23. Depart from me, you worker of iniquity. I never knew you. You will spend eternity in hellfire and gnashing of teeth. And the wickedest thing that God could have ever designed was hell. And what He did is He let the devil design that. He threw the devil down there, and the devil's the one designing that. Then shall He say also unto them on the left hand, Depart from me, ye cursed, into everlasting fire, prepared for the devil and his angels. It was prepared for the devil and his angels. Matthew 25, 41. Listen, if you're watching Brother Peter, PH Tidbits, you need to take this seriously. It's a very simple thing. I was on my way to hell, 1972, 3 o'clock in the morning. Been drinking for a week. You say, I've heard this testimony, Brother Peter. Well, you need to hear it again. And I left the place drunk, wrecked my car, got out of the car, and God said to me, your number's up. This was 3 o'clock in the morning, 1972. I said, Lord, forgive me. I'm a sinner. Come in my heart and save my soul. He delivered me instantly from the alcohol, from the sinning life, from that life. Never to take another drink, and never to swear another cuss word, and never to take the Lord's name in vain again, never to do those things again. It right up until today, and it will never happen. And so God delivers us when we ask Him to forgive us of our sin, come into our heart and forgive us of our sin and mean it. He will come in our heart and He will save our soul. And so, let's go on. I saw a great white throne, and Him that sat upon it, whose face the earth and the heavens fled away, and there was found no place for them. And I saw the dead, small and great, stand before God, and the books were opened. And another book was opened, which is the book of life. And the dead were judged out of those things which were written in the books. According, you notice books here, each one of us has our own book. According to their works. And the sea gave up the dead which were in it, and death and hell gave up the dead which were in them. And they were judged, every man according to their works. And death and hell were cast into the lake of fire. This is the second death. And whosoever was not found written in the book of life was cast into the lake of fire. Revelations 20, 11 through 15. Look it up. But the fearful and the unbelieving and the abominable and the murderers and the whoremongers and the sorcerers, idolaters, and all the liars have their part in the lake of fire, both with brimstone, which is the second death. Revelations 21 and 8. The second death. Now, wow. And with the background in mind, let us ponder this tremendous truth. To be born once means to die twice. But to be born twice means to die once. And maybe not even once, if one is alive at the rapture. When Jesus says, come up hither, if you're alive and you're a Christian, you're going without death. Well, look at 1 Corinthians 15, 51 through 53, and 1 Thessalonians 4, 16 and 17. Now let's go back to Adam for a second. Adam was encouraged to participate in the tree of life and all other trees. The trees of music, literal, art, etc. See Genesis 1, 29, Genesis 2 and 9 through 16. Even though Adam had a perfect body at creation, it was apparently necessary for him to partake of this fruit tree in order to assure that his body continued in top running order. Many centuries later, the early Spanish explorer in America looked in vain for the fountain of youth, but they searched for the wrong thing. You want the fountain of youth, you got to go to God. He's the one that can give you the fountain of youth. Adam was given a wife, chapter 2 and 22 and 24. And the first wedding in the history was conducted in Eden and performed by God Himself. Note the account. Let's look at the account of this wedding. And the rib, for a man, He made a woman. 2:22. It has often been noted that God did not take Eve from Adam's feet, that she might be his slave, nor did He take her from Adam's head, that she might be his master, but rather from under his heart, that she might love and be loved by Adam. Have you ever thought about that? When you ever read the Bible, have you ever thought about that? When you look at it, for the man is not of the woman, but the woman is of the man. Neither was the man created for the woman, but the woman for the man. 1 Corinthians 11, 8 and 9. We need to remember this. And look at the word rib. Should be translated side. The Hebrew here is tisla, and is almost always translated side, from his side. And thou shalt cast 4 rings of gold for it, and put them in the 4 corners thereof, and the 2 rings shall be in the one side of it, and 2 rings in the other side of it. Exodus 25 and 12. And that word side here, we use that explanation of when they were carrying the ark. They had the rings on the sides of it. And that word sides was what was used when we use the word Adam's rib. His strength shall be hunger, bitten, and destruction shall be ready in his side. Job 18 and 12. That word was used again there. And so we're not going to dig into that and make that be a matter of a long-term subject. Chapter 16, verse 16. What 7 words were missing from Adam's vocabulary? We are told in Genesis 2 and 19 that Adam called every living creature the name thereof. Adam must have had a tremendous vocabulary. Today there are over 3,500 different mammals, 8,600 birds, 5,500 reptiles, and amphibious. Doubtless there existed many more in Adam's day, and he named them all. In spite of this, however, there were 7 simple words unknown and unexperienced by Adam prior to his fall. These words were death. Adam did not know that word until he took from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. But of the tree of knowledge of good and evil thou shalt not eat. For in the day that thou eatest thereof, thou shalt surely die. That was separation from God. He was linked in Genesis 1 and before Genesis 2. He was linked completely to God. How could he name all the animals? He had the knowledge of God. And he didn't lose some of that knowledge until he sinned. And after he sinned, look at this. Nakedness. And the eyes of them both were open. And they knew they were naked. And they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves aprons. Genesis 3:7. You see the knowledge of everything. They had it. God had given his knowledge to them. How could they sew fig leaves together? That's the first thing. What did they sew them together with? Probably vines. If they sewed fig leaves together and they didn't have string or rope or anything, with vine. But they sewed them together. And that's an amazing statement. This is one of the first acts of man and woman together, that what they did, the first act recorded here, that they did together. They sewed fig leaves together and covered themselves because they were cursed. And unto Adam he said, because thou hast hearkened unto the voice of thy wife, and hast eaten of the tree which I commanded thee, saying, thou shalt not eat of it. Cursed is the ground for thy sake. In sorrow shalt thou eat of it all the days of thy life. Genesis 3 and 7. There were no thorns. There were no thistles. There was nothing that would be considered harmful to mankind. And by the way, the lion laid down with the lamb. And many things were different in that day. But look at sorrow came along in chapter 3 and verse 17. Thorns also and thistle shall bring forth to thee, and thou shalt eat the herb of the field. Genesis 3:18. In the sweat of thy face shalt thou eat bread, till thou return to the ground. For out of it wast thou taken, for dust thou art, and unto dust thou shalt return. Genesis 3:19. The one reason I don't like caskets, and my mother, my father, my wife, and my relatives, and anybody that I have anything to do with, was cremated and gone back to dust. And the sword, so he drove out the man, and he placed him in the east of Eden, of the cherubims, and the flaming sword which turned every way to keep the way of the tree of life. Genesis 3:24. God set a cherubim then, and that cherubim had a sword, and the cherubim, as far as I know, had faces on all four sides. Nothing could come to that cherubim from any direction, because he was there with a flaming sword, and he didn't have to move. He could sit right in one throne, and he had four faces. He saw all directions. After the fall, Adam soon added these bitter and bloody words to his vocabulary. The echo of these wicked words would haunt Adam and mankind for over 40 long centuries. Then came the second Adam. He successfully met and dealt with each word, death. Jesus said unto her, I am the resurrection and life. He that believeth in me, though he were dead, yet shall he live. John 11:25. That was me walking in death for 30 years. I walked in death, and then God revived me and gave me new life. He didn't revive me, he remade me. Then the soldiers, when they had crucified Jesus, took his garment and made for 4 parts, to every soldier a part, and also his coat. And now the coat was without seam, woven from the top throughout. John 19:23. You can tell, if you've got your pencil now, mark these scriptures down so you can go look at them. Cursed. Christ has redeemed us from the curse to the law, being made a curse for us. For it is written, cursed is everyone that hangeth on a tree. Galatians 3:13. These are Bible verses I'm reading. Yes, I'm reading them out of Wilmington's guide. Mr. Wilmington put them together, and he put no restrictions on me doing what I'm doing, reading his put together notes. Very few, listen to me, very few Christian people use original work. The original work is the Bible here. But the original dividing of the Bible here was done by Mr. Wilmington, or other people. Mr. Wilmington took up some of their notes and put them in here. And if you go to a certain page in this book, you will see ascribed to many people, many helpers in this book. But this is a book that every Christian needs. All right, let's look at the thorns. Then came Jesus forth, wearing a crown of thorns and a purple robe. And Pilate saith unto them, Behold the man. John 19:5. And bring in an agony, he prayed more earnestly. Being in agony, he prayed more earnestly. Luke 22:44. And his sweat was as great drops of blood falling down to the ground. And John 19:34. But one of the soldiers with a spear pierced his side, and forthwith came there out blood and water. And that shows you that on the cross, his heart had bursted, and blood from his heart and water came from his side. Wow. Paul shouts out the glorious results of Christ's mission, blotting out the handwriting of the ordinance that was against us, which was contrary to us, and took it out of the way, nailing it to the cross. Galatians 3 and 2 and 14, How long were Adam and Eve in the garden? That's the question. The 17th question before we came in and did the excerpt on Christ. And this is, how long were Adam and Eve in the garden? In Genesis 4 and 1, we are told that Adam knew his wife. This is the reference of a sexual union, insomuch as this is the first time it is mentioned. It would appear that they spent a very short time in Eden, perhaps only a few hours or day. Will we see Adam in heaven? We know that he was created perfect, and we know that he sinned. But was he saved later? There are 2 verses that indicate he was saved. Wow. Man. Genesis 3:21. Note this now. God clothed Adam and Eve in coats with an S. Mind you now, with an S. Of animal skins with an S. Doubtless some innocent animal died to provide this clothing, this act, a type of salvation. One for each. He didn't kill one big animal and take the skin and clothe both of them. He killed one animal for each one. Blood was shed for each one of them. The beginning of salvation here is blood had to be shed. Jesus shed his blood once and for all for everybody. Before Jesus shed his blood, every Jewish person had to shed blood of an animal, a lamb, of the first of. They had to make sure it was the first lamb born of this new animal. This is the first time she had a lamb, and they take that lamb, that first lamb, and they sacrificed it to God. And God had a sweet-smelling savor from that blood and that meat on the grill, and if you please. And then he allowed the people to partake of that meat and eat that meat. So God made 2 ways in the wilderness for the people to live. When they sacrificed, they were allowed to eat that food. And as sometimes when all of the Israelite people from all around the different nations all came in one place, and they had a big sacrifice, it also was a big feast. So, let's get back in the book. Number 18. Will we see Adam in heaven? We know he was perfect, and we know he sinned, but was saved later. There are 2 verses that indicate he was saved. Genesis 3:21. God clothed Adam and Eve in coats of skins. Doubtless some innocent animal died to prove this clothing. The act is a type of salvation. Genesis 4:4. Abel knew the right way to God, and was by the blood of a lamb. It seemed reasonable to assume this knowledge came from Adam. Adam passed it down. The knowledge of you must shed the blood of a lamb. Say, where did Cain get his wife? Verse 19, the 19th subject matter. We are in this course right here, and I must hurry. Where did Cain get his wife? Perhaps other questions concerning the Bible has been asked more than this one. To say the least, it is absolutely insufficient as compared to the one asked by the Philippian jailer. What must I do to be saved? Acts 16:30. According to Genesis 5:4, Adam and Eve, the sons and daughters, thus Cain doubtless married one of his sisters. This verse also explains that Cain was afraid after he had murdered his brother in Genesis 4:14. He no doubt assumed his parents would bear other sons and daughters, and that one of them might someday come looking for him. So he had a fear, supposedly, and we use that word lightly, supposedly, of later on having retribution on him by one of his siblings. Now, if he married one of his long-term sisters, back in Bible days, they did not list girls when they were born. They listed only boys. So when they listed Cain and Abel, they were the first two boys. Eve may have had a dozen or more girls. And those girls were seemingly in a separate place, some type of female harem thing or whatever, and they were in a separate place, and they had grown old enough to get married. Now, do the genealogies in Genesis 5 and 10 contain any gaps? The names in Genesis 5 are repeated in exact order in Chronicles 1 through 4, and in Luke 3:36 and 38. So, it might seem there is none. However, if this is true, then one must conclude the following. Creation took place around 4000 BC, and that the flood occurred around 2400 BC. That would be 1656 years after creation. As I read this, it's a secondhand study to me, in a sense. Before I got graduated and got my robe and gown, I had to learn this stuff. And I had to learn it. I had to write papers. I've got papers over here written on it, piles of papers written on it, and take this subject matter and go backwards in it and go forwards in it, and make sure that I had it up here. That Adam was a contemporary with Enoch for 308 years and died 57 years before his translation. And that Seth, Adam's son, lived to see Enoch's translation and died 14 years before the birth of Noah. And that Noah was the contemporary with Abraham for 48 years. That means Noah and Abraham could have known each other. That Shem, Noah's son, actually outlived Abraham by 35 years. However, few conservative Bible scholars would concur with all this conclusion. Well, I have a Dake's Bible over here, and I study Mr. Dake's Bible on a regular basis. And J. Phineas Dake had the idea of many things that are written here. But unless you're a Bible studier, some of that stuff, when you read it, you think it's just fell off the wall somewhere. But it didn't. J. Phineas searched out what he put in his notes and in his book. And many preachers would not agree 100% with J. Phineas on some of the things that he has. But you can go back and research it and find it to be factual. Luke 3 and 34 and 36 informs us that the approach begat Canaan, who begat Shelah, who begat Eber. And in Matthew chapter 1, 3 names are left out. And Matthew 1, 8 and 9 tells us that Asa begat Jehoshaphat, who begat Jehoiakim, who begat Uzziah. And in 2 Chronicles chapter 17, 26, we are told Asa begat Jehoshaphat. who begat Jeram, who begat Asa, who begat Joash, who begat Amasa, who begat Uzziah. And what are these who begats, and why are they important? Why are they written down in the scriptures? Because they were men used mysteriously of God, and they were mysteriously sons of God in Genesis 6. Most controversy has surrounded these verses, who were the sons of God, who married the daughters of men. There are two basic approaches to this. There is the simple interpretation, is that the sons of God were those individuals belonging to the line of Seth, because Seth was the first man that started following God on the earth as a lost sinner and become a saved man, while the daughters of men were the unsaved girls who belonged to the line of Cain. Now they were had giantess blood in them, and the second and more involved interpretation holds that the sons of God were the wicked, fallen, angelic beings of some kind who committed immoral and unnatural physical acts with women in general. There's two views. You can fall down on either side. Basic agreements for the first vows or view. This is the most natural way to interpret the passage. It is supported by Jesus' statement in Matthew 22:30. Read it. For in the resurrection, they, that's the saved human beings in heaven, neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are as the angels of God in heaven. Now, this is the verse that perhaps would say to me, after 60 years of marriage, I was married to this woman for 60 years, and after 60 years of marriage on this earth, when we get to heaven, there will be neither marriage nor given in marriage. Now, if our vows were not broken, and we were not separated or anything when she left, I'm believing there's a possibility, that's some presumption, that we will be one when we get to heaven. Because of the law of biogenesis, life begets similar life. Note the statement after it in Genesis 1:11, 12, 21, 24, and 25. Paul's statement in 1 Corinthians 15:38 and 40. There are also celestial bodies and bodies terrestrial, would indicate these two can never co-join. Moses did not use the regular Hebrew word for angel. He used the word melech, which is later implies that at least 28 times in the Pentateuch. It's repeated 28 times in the Pentateuch. Mighty men, supposed offspring of angels and women, in the Hebrew word gibber, which is in Genesis 6 and 4, which is used dozens of times in the Old Testament and always refers to human men. See Judges 6 and 12. So that does away with fallen angels having sex with the women in that verse. Basic argument for the second view. The Hebrew language seems to favor the Hebrew phrase B'nai Elion, sons of God, always referred to angels in the Old Testament in 3 and 25. The Hebrew word Nephilim, translated giants, is 6 and 4. Actually should be translated the fallen ones, or the normal word for huge men is Repha. And those men, like Og and Goliath, were descendants by the word Repha. See Deuteronomy 3:11 and 1 Chronicles 20 and 6. I'm about 1 4/3. I'm about 2/3. I'm 2/3, and time has left us. And I'm 2/3 of the way in to this study. I'm going to number this study right here. Wow, I've been. This is the threefold problem of the gap theory. It was where it started, and it goes on to prove, as the Bible is written, that there was no gap. And then we're going to go into the physical features. But there's almost always a basic, commonly held ancient legend. However, weird and distorted they may have been. In 6 and 4 we read concerning the man of renown, which some believe are the historical basis for the legends of the Hercules. That's the Hercules type people and other children of God, of mythology. This later corresponds to such Babylonian figures of Gilgamesh and the supposed son of the goddess and a mortal. He was called 2/3 God and 1/3 man. Hey, the common opinion of Jewish scholars, Josephus now, and I have his books right here and right there in my bookcase. Josephus, I love his work, and the great Jewish historian brings this out in his writings. In the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Hebrew Old Testament, and the Bible used by Jews translated Genesis 6 and 2 as the angels of God. The interpretation of the early church is unto the 4th century, and other views opposed to the angels of God. The theory was, and this is by Dr. James M. Gray, past president of the Moody Bible Institute, writes, that is the reason to believe this view would not have changed had it not been for certain erroneous opinions. Oh, watch out for opinions now. Everybody's got them. And if you put them down on paper, sometimes people pick them up as fact when they're an opinion. And the practices of Christendom, from his book, Spiritism and the Fallen Angels. Gray then suggests 2 such reasons. And I love it because as I read these men, I knew some of these men. These men are men of my time. I'm 78 years old. And back in the 70s, these men that are putting this book together right here, I knew some of them. And not personally so much as sitting down in front of them, and I was with a mass of other men. And I say, well, I knew him personally. No, I listened to him personally. I didn't know him personally. Some of them I met. Some of them I shook hands. I've shook hands with Dr. Lee Robinson. I shook hands with, I could name a dozen preachers there. And one of these was an angel worship. The church sometimes after the 4th century began worshiping angels, so the natural thing would be to deny any angel could do such vile things with humanity. Well, the other reason was celibacy. If indeed the sons of God were human men, and the monks, which have spiritual justification, creation of indulging in sexual activities, spite of their office and vows, celibacy. Well, let me tell you what. Celibacy in writing is one thing. Celibacy in fact was pretty much null and void, because sexual activity went on in almost every case of celibacy. What was the pre-flood world like? Well, life prior to the flood was doubtless very different than today. It was probably universally warm and pleasant and mild in climate. It had had no desert or ice caps, and the land surface was more extensive and the ocean much smaller. In topography, was gentle, without the rigid mountains or deeper canyons, with the effect of our water so much today. Lush vegetation may have travailed, listen to that, worldwide. There was apparently, listen to that word, no rainfall. The earth began watered by early ground dews and from artesian springs, in addition to scriptural inferences of the presence of the great oil deposits and the plant fossils found near both north and south poles give conclusive evidence that the world's climate was once tempered by even subtropical. How advanced was the pre-flood civilization? One of the most popular books on earth in the 70s was called Carols of the Gods by Eric Van Daniken. He also attempted to prove by the following data that our earth was once visited by little green men. Oh boy, you got to watch out for supposition. A landing strip built in centuries ago in Peru. Long ancient concrete construction in Bolivia. Drawings of spaceships in Mexico. There have been many things that can't be explained by mankind on this earth. And those things we have gone over 11 minutes on our time from 30. We're at 41 minutes. And we'll call it a day right here. And we'll see you next time. Yes. Right. Bye-bye.